The screams echoing from the West Wing weren't human. They were the feral snarls of the Alpha King's 4-year-old twins, tearing through yet another elite nanny. While the strongest warriors cowered, a rejected Omega Maid quietly gripped her mop, hiding a secret that would soon bring the king to his knees. The Obsidian Ridge estate was less of a home and more of a fortress, a sprawling architectural marvel of glass and dark timber nestled deep in the Pacific Northwest. But inside its impenetrable walls, Alpha King Silas Blackwood was losing a war he couldn't fight with claws or fangs. His 4-year-old twin sons, Maddox and Leo, were tearing the estate apart, literally. The heavy oak doors of the nursery shuddered as a wooden chair smashed against them from the inside, followed by a guttural, bone-chilling growl that had no business coming from a toddler. Outside in the hallway, Silas stood rigidly, his massive hands balled into fists at his sides. The veins in his neck pulsed with a mixture of raw alpha power and sheer, unadulterated exhaustion. Since his mate, Queen Diana, had passed away during the twins' traumatic birth, the boys had lacked a mother's stabilizing presence. Now, the alpha bloodline running through their tiny veins was manifesting far too early. They were experiencing premature shifting syndrome, a violent, agonizing condition where their inner wolves tried to tear their way out of bodies too small to contain them. "This is the 5th nanny this month, Alpha," muttered Dr. Arthur Harrison, the pack's chief medical officer, as he applied a thick gauze pad to the bleeding forearm of Lady Cassandra. Cassandra, a high-ranking beta from a neighboring pack, had been brought in specifically to discipline the heirs. Instead, she was sobbing hysterically, her designer dress shredded, her arm bearing the distinct, jagged puncture wounds of half-shifted fangs. "They are monsters!" Cassandra shrieked, her facade of aristocratic grace entirely shattered. "They aren't children, Silas. They are demons." Maddox's eyes turned completely gold, and Leo, he lunged at my throat. Silas's eyes flashed a dangerous, predatory crimson. The hallway temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Speak of my sons that way again, Cassandra, and you will leave this territory in a pine box." Cassandra clamped her mouth shut, whimpering as Dr. Harrison ushered her away. Silas pinched the bridge of his nose, the headache behind his eyes throbbing relentlessly. He had tried everything. Elite trainers, child psychologists specializing in lichen behavior, even powerful witches. Nothing worked. His sons were feral, locked in a perpetual state of defensive aggression. Downstairs, far away from the gilded halls of the royal wing, Sienna Hayes was scrubbing the grout of the industrial kitchen floor until her knuckles bled. Sienna was an Omega, the lowest rank in the pack hierarchy, but her status wasn't her heaviest burden. It was the invisible, jagged scar on her soul from a brutal rejection. 3 years ago, Garrett, the pack's lead tracker, had publicly rejected her as his mate. The reason? A falsified medical report claiming she was barren and genetically defective, a rumor started by none other than Cassandra, who had wanted Garrett for her own sister. Since that day, Sienna had been stripped of her dignity, relegated to the night shift cleaning crew, and subjected to the relentless cruelty of the head housekeeper, Mrs. Gable. She was entirely invisible to the higher-ups, a ghost haunting the servant corridors. "Hayes!" barked Mrs. Gable, kicking Sienna's soapy water bucket so it sloshed onto her worn sneakers. "Stop daydreaming. The royal nursery is a disaster zone. The king has ordered it cleared while he takes the terrors to the containment room. Get up there and clean the blood and the wreckage, and if you steal anything, I'll have you whipped." Sienna didn't argue. She never did. She simply wrung out her sponge, gathered her heavy plastic caddy, and kept her eyes glued to the floor. Being invisible was her only armor. To survive the devastating pain of her rejection, Sienna had been taking black market scent suppressants. Her natural Omega scent, a soothing, intoxicating blend of rain-soaked earth and wild lavender, was completely muted, making her smell like nothing but the bleach she used all day. As she made the long trek up the servant stairs to the west wing, she felt a strange, inexplicable pull in her chest, a deep, instinctual tug that made the wolf buried deep inside her. a wolf she hadn't felt since Garrett shattered their bond, whimper and pace. The nursery was a war zone. Velvet curtains hung in ribbons. Expensive wooden toys were splintered into shrapnel. A massive flat-screen television lay face down, its screen spider-webbed with cracks. But as Sienna stepped over the threshold, her heightened senses picked up something the king and the doctors had missed. She didn't smell aggression or demonic rage. She smelled absolute, paralyzing terror. Suddenly, a heavy thud echoed from the adjoining walk-in closet. Sienna froze. Mrs. Gable had said the king took the boys to the containment room, but the metallic click of the closet door locking from the inside told a different story. The twins hadn't been captured. They were hiding. Sienna set her caddy down. The scent of fear was so thick it was making her own throat tight. She approached the closet slowly, her footsteps completely silent. "Go away!" A tiny, gravelly voice snarled from the other side of the slatted wood. It was Maddox. "I'll bite you. I'll tear your throat out." It was a violent threat, but Sienna's Omega instincts heard the wavering pitch of a terrified child. "I'm not going to hurt you," Sienna said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm just the cleaning lady. I don't even have fangs right now." A moment of silence passed, then a smaller whimper. "Leo." "It hurts," Leo cried softly. "Maxie, my back hurts." Sienna's heart shattered. She knew about premature shifting, the agonizing pain of bones breaking and reforming before the body was mature enough to handle it. The doctors were treating the boys like hostile soldiers, using dominance and force, which only triggered the pups' alpha survival instincts to fight back. Without thinking about the pack laws, without worrying about Mrs. Gable or the terrifying Alpha King, Sienna did the unthinkable. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the small vial of scent suppressants she took every night. She dropped it on the floor and crushed it beneath her heel. Within seconds, the harsh, chemical barrier masking Sienna's true nature dissolved. A potent, pure Omega aura flooded the ruined nursery. It wasn't the submissive, cowering scent of a broken maid. It was the rich, deep fragrance of a maternal protector. Petrichor and crushed lavender, heavy and grounding. In werewolf dynamics, a true, unmatched Omega's scent was nature's ultimate tranquilizer, designed to soothe even the most blood-crazed alpha. Through the slatted closet door, she heard a sharp gasp. The frantic scratching of claws against the floorboards stopped instantly. Sienna slowly turned the brass knob. The lock had been engaged, but a gentle, targeted pulse of her aura made the terrified pup on the other side instinctively recoil, allowing her to click the mechanism open. She pushed the door open. The sight made her breath catch. Huddled in the far corner, surrounded by shredded designer clothes, were the two heirs to the Obsidian Ridge pack. Maddox was positioned protectively in front of his brother. His fingernails had elongated into sharp, blackened claws, and his eyes were flashing violently between human blue and feral gold. Little Leo was curled into a tight ball behind him, his spine arching unnaturally as his body tried to force a partial shift. He was sobbing, slick with sweat. If it were anyone else, Maddox would have lunged. But the heavy blanket of Sienna's scent had paralyzed his aggression. He stared at her, his little chest heaving, his nostrils flaring as his wolf brain tried to process the overwhelming wave of safety washing over him. Sienna didn't tower over them. She immediately dropped to her knees, making herself small, non-threatening. She didn't look Maddox in the eyes, a direct challenge to an alpha, but instead looked at his trembling hands. "I know," Sienna whispered, her voice rich with an ancient, instinctual cadence. "I know it feels like your bones are made of fire. I know it's too big for you." "Make it stop," Leo whimpered from behind his brother, his tiny fingers clawing at his own arms. Sienna slowly crossed the small space. Maddox bared his teeth, a low growl rumbling in his throat, but he didn't attack. She stopped just inches from him and began to hum. It wasn't a modern song. It was an old, rhythmic lichen lullaby, a primal frequency that Omegas used centuries ago to calm warriors returning from battle. The vibration of her chest, combined with the heavy lavender scent, hit the pups like a physical wave. She extended one hand, palm up, a gesture of complete submission and offering. Maddox stared at her hand. The golden hue in his eyes flickered, then receded, leaving behind the tear-filled blue eyes of a 4-year-old boy. With a broken sob, the ferocious little alpha collapsed forward into Sienna's chest. Sienna caught him, wrapping her arms around his small, trembling frame. The moment her skin made contact with his, she instinctively began to channel her own energy into him, a rare trait of pure-blood Omegas. She absorbed the frantic, erratic spikes of his alpha energy, grounding it. "Come here, Leo," she murmured softly. Leo didn't hesitate. He crawled out from the corner and buried his face in Sienna's neck. Sienna rocked them gently on the closet floor, her hands rhythmically stroking their backs, finding the tense, knotting muscles along their spines where the shift was trying to force its way out, and massaging the pain away. She kept humming, letting her scent completely saturate the small space. For the first time in their 4 years of life, the feral heirs of Obsidian Ridge went completely, utterly limp. The agonizing tension melted from their limbs, their claws retracted, their breathing slowed into the deep, rhythmic cadence of sleep. Sienna sat there in the dark, her legs going numb under the weight of the 2 sleeping children, tears silently rolling down her own cheeks. For the first time since her rejection, she didn't feel hollow. Down the hall, the heavy, frantic footsteps of King Silas Blackwood echoed against the marble. He had just discovered the containment room was empty. Panic, cold and sharp, gripped his heart. His beta, Jackson, and a squad of elite guards were right behind him. "Check the grounds. If they get out into the woods in a half-shifted state, they won't survive the cold," Silas roared, bursting through the shattered nursery doors. He stopped dead in his tracks. The air in the room hit him like a physical blow. Silas staggered. His alpha wolf, usually dominant, ruthless, and tightly controlled, suddenly dropping its guard. The scent of rain and lavender was so intoxicating, so profoundly peaceful, that the violent migraine that had plagued him for years instantly vanished. He followed the scent to the open closet door. Silas's breath hitched. There, sitting on the floor amidst the wreckage, was a woman dressed in the drab, grey uniform of the lowest servants. But she wasn't cowering. In her lap lay his 2 sons, the monsters, the terrors. They were sleeping peacefully, their faces buried in her chest, their small hands gripping her apron. Sienna looked up, her heart leaping into her throat as the massive frame of the Alpha King filled the doorway. She expected him to drag her away, to throw her in the dungeons for daring to touch the royal bloodline. Instead, Silas fell to his knees, just outside the closet door. His eyes, wide and disbelieving, darted from his sleeping sons to the terrified Maid. He could see the tracks of tears on her face, but more importantly, he could feel the residual hum of her energy, an energy that his own fractured soul was suddenly screaming out for. Before Silas could speak, a sharp gasp came from the hallway. Lady Cassandra stood there, her arm bandaged, her eyes wide with shock and immediate, venomous hatred. She recognized the Maid. She recognized the rejected Omega she had ruined years ago. And as she saw the way King Silas was staring at Sienna, with a mixture of awe and dawning reverence, Cassandra's mind began to spin a dark, treacherous web. She couldn't let a filthy floor scrubber take the position she had been maneuvering for. "Guards!" Cassandra suddenly shrieked, breaking the magical silence. "Get her away from them! The Omega is using black magic to drug the heirs!" Cassandra's shrill accusation shattered the fragile peace of the nursery. Beta Jackson and 3 heavily armed pack enforcers surged into the room, their hands instinctively dropping to the silver-laced batons at their belts. They expected to find the Omega Maid performing some dark, forbidden ritual. Instead, they found their towering, terrifying Alpha King, kneeling on the floor, weeping silent tears of relief. "Silence!" Silas roared. The command didn't come from his chest. It erupted from his very soul, a raw wave of alpha dominance that forced every wolf in the room, except Sienna and the sleeping pups, to their knees. The windows of the West Wing rattled violently in their frames. Cassandra choked on her next words, her face hitting the hardwood floor as the physical weight of the king's command crushed her defiance. Silas slowly turned his gaze to the guards. His eyes were completely crimson, the mark of an alpha wolf pushed to the absolute brink of protective instinct. "If any of you wake my sons," he growled, his voice a lethal, vibrating bass, "I will rip your throats out myself." Sienna stayed frozen, her arms still locked protectively around Maddox and Leo. She was trembling so violently that her teeth chattered. She had just broken the highest pack law by exposing her raw Omega scent to the royal heirs. She waited for the execution order, but Silas didn't call for the guards. Instead, he crawled the remaining 2 feet toward her. The massive, battle-scarred king of Obsidian Ridge reached out with a trembling hand, stopping just short of touching her cheek. Up close, the scent of her, wild lavender and rain on dry earth, hit him like a lightning strike to the heart. His inner wolf, which had been trapped in a state of grieving madness for 4 years, suddenly howled in euphoric recognition. "Mate!" The realization slammed into Silas with staggering force. This wasn't just a maid. She was his second chance. The moon goddess had placed his fated mate right under his roof, scrubbing his floors, while he had been too blinded by grief and duty to notice. "Who are you?" Silas breathed, his voice laced with a reverence that shocked the kneeling guards. Sienna Hayes, my alpha," she stammered, keeping her eyes respectfully lowered. "I am from the night cleaning crew. I'm sorry. I heard them crying. I couldn't let them hurt anymore." Before Silas could respond, heavy boots pounded down the hallway. Garrett, the pack's lead tracker and the man who had brutally rejected Sienna 3 years ago, burst into the room. He had been patrolling the perimeter when the king's roar echoed through the estate. "Alpha, is there a breach?" Garrett started, but the words died in his throat. The heavy, unsuppressed scent of the pureblood Omega filled his nostrils. It bypassed his logical brain and struck his primal instincts. Garrett's eyes widened in absolute shock as he looked at the woman on the floor. Without the cheap chemical suppressants masking her true nature, Sienna was radiant. Even in her drab grey uniform, the sheer power of her aura was intoxicating. "Sienna?" Garrett whispered, stepping forward in a daze. His inner wolf, the same wolf that had rejected her because of Cassandra's forged medical records, suddenly clawed at his chest in agonizing regret. He realized, in one devastating second, what he had thrown away. "Your scent. You're perfect." A low, vibrating snarl filled the room. It was a sound so dark, so inherently violent, that the temperature in the room plummeted. Silas rose to his full height of 6'4", stepping protectively in front of Sienna and his children. His gaze locked onto Garrett with lethal intent. "Take one more step toward her, tracker, and you will leave this room without your legs." "Alpha, wait," Garrett pleaded, stepping out of line, driven mad by the sudden, overwhelming realization of his past mistake. "She was my intended. 3 years ago. There was a misunderstanding. She belongs to me. She belongs to no one but herself," Silas countered, his voice booming with absolute authority. He turned his attention to Cassandra, who was still trembling on the floor. Silas was a brilliant tactician, and the pieces were snapping together rapidly. He remembered Cassandra introducing Garrett to her sister shortly after a supposed medical scandal involving an Omega Maid. "Beta Jackson," Silas commanded, not taking his eyes off the treacherous noblewoman. "Take Lady Cassandra to the holding cells. Audit her financial accounts, her private communications, and every medical record she has ever submitted to this pack. If you find even a single discrepancy regarding Sienna Hayes, prepare the exile paperwork." Cassandra screamed, thrashing wildly as Jackson hauled her up by her uninjured arm. "You can't do this. I am highborn. She is a floor scrubber. She used a spell." "Take her away," Silas said coldly. Once the room was cleared, Silas turned back to Sienna. He knelt again, moving with profound gentleness. He scooped Maddox into his left arm and Leo into his right, the boys barely stirring in their deeply peaceful slumber. "Sienna," Silas said softly, extending his hand to help her up. "Your days of cleaning floors are over. You are coming with me to the royal wing. My sons need you, and I need you." Sienna looked at his massive, scarred hand. For the first time in 3 years, she didn't feel invisible. She reached out, her small fingers resting in his palm, and let the Alpha King pull her to her feet. For 3 weeks, the Obsidian Ridge estate experienced a peace it hadn't known since Queen Diana's death. Sienna was moved into a sprawling, sunlit suite adjacent to the nursery. Under her constant, soothing presence, the twins' premature shifting syndrome vanished. Maddox and Leo transformed from feral terrors into bright, affectionate little boys who trailed after Sienna like ducklings. Silas, too, was changing. The dark circles under his eyes faded. He spent every spare moment in the royal wing, bringing Sienna rare books from the pack archives and joining them for dinner. The pack watched in stunned silence as their terrifying Alpha King sat on the floor, letting his sons climb over him while he stared at the former maid with unmistakable, burning devotion. He was courting her, slowly and respectfully, terrifyingly aware of the deep scars Garrett's rejection had left on her soul. But in the shadows of the pack hierarchy, venom was brewing. Mrs. Gable, the head housekeeper who had tormented Sienna for years, was deeply loyal to Cassandra's family. With Cassandra facing an impending trial for forging Sienna's medical records, Mrs. Gable knew she had to act to destroy the Omega's reputation once and for all. It happened on the night of the Blue Moon Festival. Silas was required to address the pack in the main courtyard, leaving Sienna alone with the twins in the royal suite. Mrs. Gable, using her master keys, slipped into the estate's kitchens. She retrieved a vial Cassandra had smuggled to her weeks ago, liquid wolfsbane, refined to bypass a werewolf's keen sense of taste, but highly lethal to pups. She slipped 3 drops into the warm milk prepared for the twins' bedtime routine. By the time Silas returned from his speech, the royal wing was in complete chaos. Sienna was kneeling in the center of the nursery, screaming for Dr. Harrison. Maddox and Leo were writhing on the floor, their veins bulging black against their pale skin, black foam bubbling past their lips. "What happened?" Silas roared, crashing through the door, his heart stopping at the sight of his dying sons. "I don't know," Sienna sobbed frantically. "They drank their milk, and then they just collapsed." Dr. Harrison rushed in, immediately shining a light into Maddox's unresponsive eyes. "Goddess above," the doctor gasped, his face turning ashen. "It's wolfsbane, a massive dose. Alpha, they are too young. Their bodies can't filter it. They won't survive the hour." At that moment, Mrs. Gable burst into the room, pointing a trembling, accusatory finger at Sienna. "It was her. I saw her. The Omega is taking her revenge for the years we kept her in the servants' quarters. I found this under her pillow." The housekeeper dramatically tossed a small, empty glass vial onto the carpet. Garrett, who had been on security detail in the hallway, stepped forward, his eyes burning with misplaced righteousness. "I knew it," he snarled. "An Omega from a broken bloodline can't be trusted. Step away from the heirs, Sienna." Silas looked at the vial, then at Mrs. Gable, his eyes narrowing into deadly slits. His wolf didn't smell deception on Sienna. He smelled absolute, soul-crushing agony. But Sienna didn't care about the accusations. She didn't care about Garrett or Mrs. Gable. She looked at Maddox and Leo, the boys who had finally given her life meaning again, and made her choice. "Get out of my way," Sienna commanded. It wasn't a whisper. It was an ancient, echoing decree that resonated with pure-blood Omega power. Even Silas took a step back in awe. Sienna threw herself over the twins' bodies. She didn't have magical potions, but pure-blood Omegas possessed an ancient, almost forgotten ability, the power of energy transference. They could heal by absorbing the trauma of others into their own bodies. She placed one hand on Maddox's chest and the other on Leo's. Closing her eyes, she pushed every ounce of her life force, every drop of her soothing lavender aura, directly into their rapidly failing hearts. A brilliant, blinding white light erupted from her hands. "Sienna, stop!" Dr. Harrison yelled over the rushing wind that suddenly filled the room. "The wolf's bane will transfer to you. It will kill you." "Let it!" Sienna screamed back, tears streaming down her face as the black veins on the boy's skin began to visibly recede, traveling up Sienna's arms instead. The excruciating pain of the poison hit her bloodstream, burning like liquid fire. But she didn't let go. She poured her love, her maternal instinct, and her very soul into the pups. With a violent gasp, Maddox's eyes flew open, the blackness gone. Leo coughed, his breathing returning to normal. They were safe. Sienna smiled down at them, a weak, beautiful smile, before her eyes rolled back. She collapsed onto the carpet, lifeless. "No!" Silas's roar shook the very foundations of the Obsidian Ridge estate. He lunged forward, catching Sienna's frail body. Her skin was ice cold, the dark veins of the poison crawling up her neck. Silas turned his devastating gaze to Mrs. Gable. The housekeeper was backing away, terrified. But Beta Jackson was already there. He had reviewed the kitchen security tapes while the chaos unfolded. "She spiked the milk, Alpha," Jackson stated coldly, clamping iron cuffs onto Mrs. Gable's wrists. "On Cassandra's orders, we have it all on tape." Silas didn't waste breath on a trial. Take her to the border. Strip her of her wolf. Let the rogues have her. And Garrett. Silas's voice was a deadly whisper as he looked at the tracker who had dared to accuse his mate. "You are stripped of your rank. Leave my territory before the sun rises, or I will hunt you for sport." Garrett paled, turning and fleeing the room in absolute disgrace. Silas pulled Sienna to his chest. He wasn't going to lose his mate. Not again. Not the woman who had sacrificed her life for his children. He bit deep into his own wrist, drawing pure Alpha King blood, rich with regenerative power, and pressed it to her lips. "Drink, my queen," Silas pleaded, tears falling onto her pale cheeks. "Come back to us. I command it. I beg you." For a terrifying, agonizing minute, nothing happened. Then a slow, deep breath hitched in Sienna's chest. The black veins on her neck began to fade. The scent of wild lavender, weak but resilient, slowly filled the room once more. Sienna opened her eyes, looking up into the tear-filled, crimson eyes of the Alpha King. "Are they safe?" she whispered, her voice hoarse. "They are safe," Silas choked out, pulling her into a fierce, desperate kiss that sealed their mating bond, sending a shock-wave of golden light throughout the entire estate. "And so are you, forever." Maddox and Leo scrambled up, throwing their little arms around Sienna's waist. "Mummy," Leo mumbled, burying his face in her neck. Sienna wrapped her arms around her new family, knowing she would never be invisible, rejected, or alone, ever again. She was the queen of Obsidian Ridge, and she had finally found her home. Did Sienna's fearless sacrifice and the Alpha King's ultimate revenge leave you completely breathless? If you loved this intense werewolf romance and want more gripping tales of rejected mates finding their true destiny and claiming their power, hit that like button, share this video with your fellow pack members, and subscribe to our channel. Turn on notifications so you never miss a twist. What should happen to Cassandra next? Let us know in the comments.